The photograph developed slowly, the way memories do. Grainy at the edges, golden at the center. A tall man in a dark suit standing against the Han River at dusk, unaware he was being captured. His profile was sharp. His posture was the kind that didn't happen by accident. He looked like someone who had never been caught off guard in his life. In 8 months, that photograph would be the thing that saved them both. But on the night it was taken, it was just an accident. The woman who took it didn't even own a camera. The city of Seoul moved the way it always did on a Saturday evening, loud and golden and completely indifferent to the lives being altered inside it. The Mapo District Promenade was alive with the Han River City Photo Walk, 30 strangers in lanyards and matching enthusiasm moving through the last hour of golden light with cameras raised and expressions that said they were exactly where they wanted to be. At the back of the group, 2 people wore expressions that said the complete opposite. Han Ji-hoon checked his watch for the 3rd time in 4 minutes. He was 32 years old. He ran the most surgically precise criminal organization in South Korea from behind a perfectly legal holding company in Yeouido, and he had not wanted to attend a single thing in the last decade, the way he did not want to be standing on this promenade right now, wearing a name tag that said Park Min-jun. His assistant had registered him under the fake name. His PR team had insisted on the event. Civilian optics, community relations, twice yearly, non-negotiable. He had stood in his office that morning and decided that after tonight, his PR team was fired. Then he had come anyway, because Han Ji-hoon, despite everything, was a man who honored his commitments even when he hated them. Across the group and slightly apart from it, Nina Williams was eating tteokbokki from a paper cup with the focused, committed energy of someone who had decided the food was the only worthwhile thing about the evening. She was 27 years old, Nigerian-British, a brand strategist and creative consultant who had been based in Seoul for 6 months on a contract her colleague had signed her up for without asking. The colleague had also signed her up for this photo walk, also without asking, which was beginning to feel like a pattern that required a direct conversation. Nina was holding a disposable camera her hotel concierge had pressed into her hands out of pity 40 minutes ago. She had been holding it wrong for all 40 of those minutes, and she had decided she did not care even slightly. The group leader announced the first walking segment with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting their whole life to announce a walking segment, and the 30 strangers moved forward in a cheerful cluster. Han Ji-hoon stayed where he was for exactly half a second longer than everyone else. Nina Williams, finishing the last of her tteokbokki, also stayed for half a second longer. Their eyes met across the emptying space between them, not with recognition of identity, but with something more immediate than that. The recognition of kinship. 2 people who understood instantly that the other one was here under protest. She looked away first, crumpled her paper cup, started walking. He fell into step in the same direction. Not beside her, not quite, just in the same direction, the way planets move in parallel without touching. 20 minutes into the walk, the group clustered around the photography guide, who was explaining golden hour composition with the intensity of a man defending a thesis. Ji-hoon had drifted to the edge of the group. The woman from earlier was also at the edge. She was looking out at the Han River with her camera dangling from one wrist by its strap, completely untouched, with the serene detachment of someone who had made peace with being in the wrong place. He walked over, stood beside her, looked at the river. "You haven't taken a single photo," he said. She turned to look at him with the slowness of someone who was not easily startled, and was not startled now. She looked at him the way she looked at the river, directly, without performance, like she was simply deciding what she thought. "Neither have you," she said. A beat of silence. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but the architecture of one. Fair. They stood looking at the river. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that had no business existing between strangers but did anyway, easy and unhurried. "I don't even like photography," she said, conversationally, the way someone mentions weather. "Then why are you here?" "My colleague signed me up without asking." She glanced at him sideways. "You?" "My assistant, under a fake name." She looked at him properly now, with interest that she didn't bother to disguise. What's the fake name? Park Min-jun, she laughed. Genuine and warm and surprised out of her. The kind of laugh that happens before you decide to have it. He watched it happen on her face and felt something shift in his chest with the quiet certainty of something that had been waiting to shift for a very long time. I'm Nina, she said when she'd recovered. Ji-hoon, he said. And then, because something about this woman made honesty feel like the only available option, Han Ji-hoon, not Park Min-jun. Well, she raised her empty paper cup in a small toast. Nice to meet you, Han Ji-hoon. He looked at her for 1 second longer than casual. His chest did something that had no name in his vocabulary and no place in his black and white world. He had run an empire since he was 23 years old. He had sat across tables from men who wanted him dead and felt nothing but clarity. He had never once in his adult life been ambushed. She was ambushing him completely. The group moved on, and they fell into step beside each other, not by decision, simply by the natural logic of two bodies that had stopped trying to be anywhere else. They walked without talking for a while, through the golden light and the noise of the other walkers, their hands swinging at their sides, close enough that the air between them was aware of itself. At the Han River overlook, where the light was doing everything light is supposed to do at that hour, and everyone had their cameras raised, the photography guide was gesturing at the skyline with evangelical joy. Ji-hoon and Nina stood slightly apart from the group. You should take at least one photo, he said. You're holding the camera and everything. My colleague paid for the ticket, she said. Different thing entirely. Still. She looked at the disposable camera in her hand with mild skepticism, the way you might look at a piece of furniture in a room it doesn't belong in. Then she raised it, aimed it vaguely in the direction of the river. Her finger hovered over the button. Then she turned slightly, just slightly, and without thinking about it, without planning it, without understanding yet why her instincts made the choice they did, she photographed him instead. The shutter clicked. She lowered the camera, looked at what she'd done. He raised an eyebrow. Was that me? The light was interesting, she said smoothly. On me. On the river. You were in the way. He looked at her for a long moment, with an expression that was dangerously close to a smile. The river? Yes. I was in the way of the river. You're very tall. He said nothing. She looked back at the river before her face could do something she'd regret. Her heart was moving at a speed she didn't have a reasonable explanation for. For the rest of the walk, they stayed near each other without acknowledging that they were doing it. They didn't talk much. There was something easy about not talking, which was itself unusual, because Nina Williams did not typically find silence easy with people she'd known for 40 minutes. He asked her once how long she'd been in Seoul, and she told him 6 months, almost 7. She asked him once if he grew up here, and he said yes, always. He'd never really left. She thought about what that meant, to be from a place so completely that leaving it was never a question, and found she wanted to ask him more about it, and didn't, because the evening was almost over, and the question felt like it belonged to a longer conversation than the one they had time for. When the group disbanded at the end of the promenade, he turned to say something to her. He stopped, because she was already looking at him, directly, in that way she had, like she'd been looking before he turned and simply hadn't looked away. Most people looked at Han Ji-hoon with careful calibration. They looked at him the way you look at something that might move suddenly. She looked at him the way she looked at the river, like she was simply deciding what she thought. He said, instead of whatever he'd been going to say, You should keep the camera. She looked down at the disposable camera in her hand, then back at him. Why? You took one photo all evening. I want to know what you found worth keeping. She didn't answer. He held her gaze for one more moment, the last moment the evening would allow, and then nodded once, the most contained goodbye in recent history, and walked away toward the car,
waiting at the end of the block. She watched him go. Her hand tightened around the camera.
3 days later, she forgot her umbrella in a coffee shop in Uljiro, and he was the reason she did. She had come in from the rain, shaking water off her jacket, already irritated about the weather and the fact that she'd left the office 15 minutes later than intended, and she pushed through the door of the narrow Uljiro coffee shop and stopped, because he was standing at the counter with an Americano and his phone, and the moment he looked up, her face did the thing it did now when she saw him. Changed before she could manage it. His face did the same thing. Every table was full. He gestured to the seat across from his without making it a question, simply creating space for her. And she sat down because she wanted to, and because standing in a doorway dripping was undignified. They talked for 2 hours. She told him about the brand contract, the client she was rebuilding a product identity for, the particular challenge of doing creative work in a language you don't speak natively. He told her about real estate, property development, the vague corporate language of a man whose legitimate business was real enough to sustain scrutiny. She told him about Lagos and London and the specific sensation of being from 2 places completely and belonging to neither one fully. He listened to this with the focused attention of someone who was not waiting for his turn to speak. And she noticed this about him the way you notice something quietly remarkable, without fanfare, just with the clean recognition that it was true. He told her once about a business trip to Tokyo that had gone completely wrong due to a translator misunderstanding so catastrophic it had nearly ended a negotiation. And she laughed so genuinely and for so long that he watched it happen on her face with an expression he would not have known to name. It felt like warmth. It felt like something he had not allowed himself in a very long time. When she stood to leave, she gathered her bag and her coat and said goodbye and walked out into the rain, which had slowed to something forgiving. And she was halfway down the block before she realized she'd left her umbrella on the back of the chair. Inside, Han Ji-hoon picked it up, stood at the window, and watched her disappear into the gray of the Ujiro afternoon, small and purposeful in the rain, not hurrying, like she had made her peace with being wet. He kept the umbrella. 2 days later, it appeared at the front desk of her building. No note, nothing. Just her umbrella returned in a clean paper bag. She stood in the lobby holding it and felt something move through her chest that she didn't quite have a name for yet. She called him that evening. He picked up on the second ring. "You returned my umbrella." "You left it." "You didn't have to return it yourself." "I didn't," he said. "I had someone bring it." "Oh." A pause. "That's somehow both more and less personal. Is that a problem?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "It isn't." There was a brief silence, the comfortable kind, the kind that had started at the photo walk and apparently had no intention of going away. "I found a place," he said then, "that makes jollof rice. Someone mentioned to me that you'd been looking." She went completely still. "Someone mentioned?" "Yes." "Who mentioned?" "It doesn't matter. I want to know if it's any good." The meal arrived at her office the next afternoon, beautifully packaged, jollof rice and fried plantain, a small card with a single initial. J. She opened the container and the smell hit her first. The right smell. The familiar smell that meant home in the specific way food means home when you've been away from it long enough. And she sat down at her desk and felt something dangerously close to undone. She called him while she was still eating. "It's good," she said without preamble. "How good?" "Embarrassingly good. I might finish all of it." "Finish all of it." "I am." She took another bite. "Thank you, Ji-hoon." It was the first time she'd said his name without the distance of full formality, and across the city in his Yoido office, Han Ji-hoon, who had not been caught off guard by anything in 9 years, sat very still for a moment, with his phone in his hand, and something happening in his chest that was going to be a problem. He did not fire his PR team. He decided, quietly, to send them a gift basket instead. If you're loving this story so far, hit that like button and subscribe. The best is still to come. The Bukchang Gallery opening was the kind of event that existed at the intersection of art and networking, where people stood in front of photographs they weren't really looking at and had conversations they weren't really having. Jihoon was there because one of his legitimate holdings had sponsored the exhibition. Nina was there because her brand client was one of the featured photographers. They found each other across the room the way they always seem to. Not by looking, but by some quieter system that had apparently been running between them since the photo walk, without either of them authorizing it. He brought her a glass of wine without asking. She accepted it without thanking him, which made something move at the corner of his mouth. They stood beside each other in front of a large black and white photograph of a Seoul alleyway at midnight, all shadow and wet stone and a single lit doorway at the end. Neither of them spoke for a while. Their arms were touching, just the outside edges of their forearms, and neither of them moved away from it. They simply stood there, arms touching, looking at the photograph, and the contact was so quiet and so deliberate in its quietness that it was somehow louder than anything else in the room. "It looks like a beginning," Nina said finally about the photograph. "Or an end. I can't tell which." "Maybe both," Jihoon said. "Maybe they look the same." She turned to look at him at the same time he turned to look at her, and for a moment they were very close, closer than the room required, and neither of them corrected it. His eyes moved across her face with the careful attention of a man reading something he didn't want to misunderstand. She looked back at him steadily, the way she always did, without performance, without the armor most people wore around him. Then her colleague materialized at her elbow with the fizzing energy of someone carrying what they believed to be excellent news. "Nina, I have to tell you the funniest thing," the colleague said, already smiling. "You know that mood board from last week's pitch, the one with the street photography from the photo walk?" She paused for effect. "One of the client's team recognized someone in it, the tall man in the background of your river shot. And I don't know who he is, but they ended the meeting. Just ended it. Everyone went pale, and suddenly the room had somewhere else to be." The colleague laughed, delighted by the absurdity of it. Nina did not laugh. She kept her expression exactly where it was through the specific discipline of someone who had spent years in rooms where keeping your expression exactly where it was mattered. Beside her, Jihoon had gone very still. She felt it rather than saw it, the quality of the stillness, like a frequency dropping. "Wild, right?" the colleague said. "Anyway, I rescheduled for next week with a different deck. Just wanted to tell you." And she moved away into the crowd. The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds. "Jihoon?" Nina said quietly. "Not here," he said. Lower, calmer, with the precision of someone who had spent years managing information in rooms full of people. "I'll explain everything. Not here." She looked at him carefully. His face was composed, beautifully, deliberately composed, but she had been studying this face for weeks, and she could see beneath the composition to something that was working hard underneath it. She nodded once, held her wine glass, turned back to the photograph on the wall. They stayed for another 40 minutes, because leaving immediately would have been its own kind of statement, and Han Ji-hoon did not make uncontrolled statements. They stood near each other and spoke occasionally, and neither of them touched their drinks much. When they finally left, it was separately, through different exits, and he texted her an address. Her Yeongnam-dong rooftop was the best version of Seoul, the city in every direction, lit and layered and enormous, the kind of view that made your problems feel appropriately sized. She came up to find him already there, his jacket off, his sleeves rolled to the forearm, which was such a departure from the perfect tailoring she'd always seen him in, that she stood in the rooftop doorway for a moment, just registering it. He turned when he heard her, looked at her across the rooftop with an expression that was neither the gallery composure nor the almost smile from the photo walk, but something in between, something that had not been managed. "How bad is it?" she said. Not a question exactly, an invitation. He told her. Not everything. She understood that and didn't push it, because she was intelligent enough to know that some doors opened slowly, and some opened only once, and rushing them was how you lost them. But enough. Legitimate business with architecture beneath it. An organization that had grown in the years after his father died when he was 23, and there was power to be managed and no one else to manage it. People who knew his name and reacted to it the way that client's team had reacted, with the careful stillness of people who understood that proximity to him was a calculation. He spoke evenly, without apology but without pride either, like someone reading a file he hadn't written but was responsible for nonetheless. She listened without interrupting. The city moved below them. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "How complicated," she said. "Complicated enough that you should probably walk away. Is that what you want?" He looked at her directly. "No." She nodded slowly, processing, her eyes on the horizon where Seoul's lights blurred into the low clouds. He watched her the way he watched everything that mattered, with complete attention, missing nothing. "Why do you look at me like that?" he said. She turned. "Like what?" "Like you already know how this ends. Like you've already decided you're not afraid of it." She held his gaze. "Maybe I'm not." He moved toward her, slowly, the way he did everything that mattered, giving her every opportunity to change what was happening. His hand came up, and he pushed her hair back from her face with a gentleness that was startling in a man whose hands had done very different things. His thumb traced her cheekbone, barely there, more pressure than a breath and less than a touch, and she stayed absolutely still, watching him, because she understood instinctively that this man moved carefully toward the things he wanted, and she didn't want to be the reason he stopped. "Nina." "Ji-hoon." He kissed her, carefully at first, the question form of a kiss, tentative and searching, leaving her room to answer or not answer. She answered. Her hand found the lapel of his jacket and pulled, not urgently but with intention, and the kiss deepened the way understanding deepens, gradually and then entirely. When they finally separated, he kept his forehead pressed against hers, and his eyes closed, and they both breathed for a moment, in the particular silence that follows something that cannot be taken back. "I've been thinking about doing that," he said quietly, "since the photo walk." She laughed, soft and warm and real, the kind of laugh that happened in the chest before it happened anywhere else. "Me too." He pulled back just far enough to look at her face. Something had changed in his. Something had opened that she hadn't seen open before. Something younger and less defended, like a room in a house that had been closed off for a long time and was now full of light. She thought, this is what he looks like underneath all of it. She thought, I would like to see this always. She did not say either of those things. She leaned up and kissed him once more, briefly and precisely, and then turned back to the city because she needed a moment, and she thought he might too. Below them, Seoul carried on without them. 3 days later, Nina found the thing that broke it open. She had been going through her contract files for a routine renewal, administrative work, the kind she usually did with music playing and half her attention elsewhere, when a subsidiary name in the awarding company's documentation caught her eye. It was small, nested 4 levels deep in the corporate structure of the company that had commissioned her sole contract. She almost scrolled past it. She didn't. She searched the subsidiary, then the parent company, then the parent company's parent. She sat back in her chair. Hanul Group. Her 6-month sole contract, the one that had relocated her from London, that had felt like the right opportunity at the right time, that her agency had told her was a competitive selection, that she had been proud of getting, had been awarded by a company that sat 4 corporate layers deep inside Ji-hoon's legitimate holdings. The selection committee had been real. The pitch had been real. The work was real. But the shortlist had been engineered. She could see it now, in the architecture of the thing, the way you can see the structure of a building once you know what to look for. Someone inside Hanul had made sure her name was on the list. Someone had made sure the list led to her. She sat very still in her office chair for a long time. She thought about the photo walk, about the coffee shop in Uljiro, about the umbrella and the jollof rice and the rooftop and his hand on her face and the kiss that she had been carrying around inside her chest for 3 days like something precious. She thought, he brought me to Seoul. She thought, before he ever met me, he moved me. She picked up her phone, put it down, picked it up again. She called him. He answered on the second ring, the way he always did. Come over, she said. Don't send anyone. Come yourself. A pause, brief. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He came in 19, alone, which his security team considered professionally inadvisable, and which he did anyway because she'd asked him not to send anyone, and he had started, without fully acknowledging it to himself, making decisions based on what she needed. She was standing in the middle of her apartment when he walked in, her laptop open on the coffee table to the subsidiary page, the corporate trail visible and damning on the screen. She had not poured herself a drink. She had not sat down. She was simply standing there, which told him immediately that whatever was coming was not going to be managed easily. He looked at the screen, then at her. She let the silence work for a moment. Then, you moved me like a chess piece. I know. You found an essay I wrote, and you engineered a short list, and you brought me to Seoul. Yes. Before you ever met me. Yes. She looked at him steadily, and what he saw in her face was not fury. Fury would have been easier to navigate. What he saw was something quieter and more serious. Hurt, wearing the clothes of composure. Did you ever see me as a person? Or was I always something you decided to acquire? I saw you as a person, he said, and the evenness went out of his voice for the first time, replaced by something that cost him something to show. I saw you as a person before I saw you as anything else. That essay, the way you wrote about identity and creative integrity, it was the most honest thing I had read in years. I wanted... He stopped, pressed his jaw closed, opened it again. I don't know what I wanted, exactly. I wanted to meet you. I know that doesn't make what I did right. No, she said. It doesn't. The silence between them was a different quality now. Not the comfortable silence of the promenade or the coffee shop, but something with weight. Something that had to be stood inside rather than floated through. Nina. I need you to leave. He looked at her. Something moved through his face. Not argument, not negotiation, just the plain impact of it, hitting him where he stood. He nodded once, barely, and he left. The door closed behind him with the quiet click of a well-fitted door in a well-managed building, and Nina stood in the middle of her apartment in the silence he'd left behind, and did not cry. She breathed. She looked at her laptop screen. She closed it. She went to the window and looked at the city that had been his before it was ever hers, and thought about what it meant to be chosen without being asked. Outside, in the back of the car his security had insisted on despite his insistence otherwise, Han Ji-hoon sat with his phone in his hand and did not use it. He looked at the city going past the window. His city. Every corner of it mapped and owned and managed, and felt, for the first time in 9 years, like he had done something he could not strategize his way out of. Like he had done something he simply had to carry. He had been building things his whole life. He did not know, until this moment, what it felt like to watch something he wanted to keep walk toward the edge of being lost. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Then it rained. If this story is hitting different, drop a comment below. Tell us your favorite moment so far. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Seoul in the rain was a different city. The neon bled into the wet pavement, and the streets narrowed, and everything felt closer than it was, more intimate than the daylight allowed. Mina had been walking for 40 minutes through it without caring about the water soaking through her jacket, because walking was the only thing that helped when her mind was doing what her mind was currently doing, which was running the same loop it had been running for 3 weeks. The shortlist, the subsidiary, the essay, his face when she told him to leave, the door closing, the silence after. She had thrown herself into work the way she always did when something was too large to look at directly. New project briefs, late nights, Saturday mornings at Mangwon Market with Jade, who asked no questions and bought her fish cake skewers and iced coffee and made her laugh until the laughing felt real instead of performed. Jade was the best thing Seoul had given her, uncomplicated and warm and exactly what a best friend was supposed to be, present without pressure, funny without effort, the kind of person who made the unfamiliar feel survivable. It was Jade who had finally, over their third Mangwon Market Saturday, mentioned the man she'd been seeing. She'd been cagey about him for months, uncharacteristically private, deflecting with humor every time Nina had asked, which had made Mina curious, but not enough to push. Tonight, sitting across from each other with skewers and too much iced coffee, and the market moving warmly around them, Jade had set down her cup and said, "I want you to meet him." Which was how Nina found herself at a Hongdae restaurant that evening, smoothing her jacket, extending her hand across the table toward Jade's boyfriend with a smile already in place. The smile stayed in place through pure discipline. She knew his face. She had seen it twice, once in passing at the Bukchon Gallery opening, standing near Ji-hoon with the alert stillness of someone whose job was to be alert, and once in the corporate documentation she had spent a sleepless night reading 3 weeks ago. Baek Sung-min, 34 years old, Ji-hoon's second-in-command, the most capable and most dangerous lieutenant in the Hanul Syndicate, described in the documentation she'd read with the kind of language that made you sit back in your chair. He recognized her in the same instant she recognized him. She saw it, the fractional pause, the rapid recalibration behind his eyes, the decision made in under a second to give nothing away. He had good instincts. She had better ones. "Mina Williams," she said, completing the handshake smoothly. "Nice to meet you." "Baek Sung-min," he said. "Likewise." Jade looked between them with the bright attentiveness of someone who had sensed something and wasn't sure yet what it was. "Do you two know each other?" A half-second negotiation conducted entirely through eye contact between two people who had never spoken in their lives. "We've crossed paths," Sung-min said. "Small city," Nina said, and picked up her menu. The dinner was, by any observable measure, a pleasant evening. Sung-min was charming in the specific way of men who had learned charm as a professional tool and then discovered they actually possessed it naturally. Warm without being performed, funny without trying to be, attentive to Jade in a way that was so genuine it was the most disorienting thing about the entire night. He loved her. Mina could see it the way you could see weather coming, clearly, undeniably, in everything he did. He refilled her water before she asked. He remembered something she'd mentioned weeks ago and asked a follow-up question. When Jade laughed, he watched her with an expression that had no agenda in it at all. Nina ate her dinner and smiled and contributed to the conversation, and underneath all of it, her mind was very quietly doing what her mind did, mapping, connecting, understanding the geometry of the situation she was now standing inside of. Her best friend in Seoul was in love with the second-in-command of the organization that had complicated everything. The world, she thought, had a very particular sense of humor. She walked home afterward instead of taking a cab. She needed the air. She needed the movement. The rain started 20 minutes in, and she let it, turning her face up briefly like a question directed at no one, then walking on. She heard the car before she saw it, a low sound pulling up beside her, matching her pace. The window came down. She looked over. Of course. Han Ji-hoon looked back at her through the open window of a car that cost more than her annual retainer, his expression doing the thing it did, giving away more than he intended when he looked at her, less than she wanted, exactly enough to keep her standing on the pavement in the rain instead of walking on. He got out of the car. No umbrella. He simply got out and fell into step beside her in the rain without asking her to get in, without explaining himself, without any of the management or strategy she'd accused him of. Just beside her. In the rain. Like it was the most obvious place to be. They walked half a block. "You're getting soaked," she said. "So are you." She stopped walking, turned to face him properly, the rain coming down between them and on them and around them, the Yeonam-dong street empty and lit orange by the streetlights. "Ji-hoon, what are we doing?" Not a question. The real kind of asking. The kind that wanted the true answer, whatever shape it came in. "I don't know," he said, and it was the most unguarded thing she'd ever heard him say. No architecture to it, no management, just the plain, honest words of a man who didn't have the answer and was saying so. "I've never done this before." "Done what?" "Wanted something I couldn't control." He looked at her steadily, water running along the sharp line of his jaw, his shirt beginning to darken with rain, looking nothing like the untouchable version of himself, and exactly like the version she'd been thinking about for 3 weeks. "I've spent 9 years controlling everything around me, every variable, every outcome. And then you were standing at the back of a walking group eating tteokbokki, and you looked at me like I was ordinary, and I—" He stopped. Something moved through his face. "I didn't know what to do with it. I still don't." She looked at him for a long time. The rain was consistent and unhurried. Then she stepped forward, into his space, into the warmth of him despite the cold rain, and pressed her forehead against the line of his jaw. Not a kiss, just contact. Her eyes closed. She felt him go completely still, the absolute stillness of a man who understood that moving might end something. And then his hand came up slowly and settled at the back of her neck, warm and careful. And they stood like that in the rain on the empty street while the city went on without them. "I'm not done being angry," she said quietly, against his jaw. "I know." "What you did, the shortlist, the contract, that was a decision you made about my life without asking me. I need you to understand that it wasn't romantic. It was a violation of my autonomy." "I know," he said again, and the weight in it was genuine. The weight of a man who had sat with something for 3 weeks and understood it now in a way he hadn't when he'd done it. "I can't undo it. I can tell you that I see it clearly, that I don't have an argument for it." She pulled back slightly, looked at him in the rain. "Complete honesty from now on. Everything. No management, no strategy, no deciding what I can handle. Everything." "Everything," he said, without hesitation. "I mean it, Ji-hoon. I know you do. Everything." She searched his face, that face she had been learning for weeks, the geography of it, the way it moved when he was being real versus when he was being careful. This was real. She could see the difference now. She took his hand. They walked. The next morning she called Jade. She didn't tell her everything. She told her enough. That the man she'd been involved with was connected to Sung-min in ways that were serious and complicated, and that Jade deserved to ask Sung-min direct questions and receive direct answers. There was a long silence on Jade's end. Then, "How long have you known?" And Nina said, "Since dinner." And Jade said, "Okay." In the particular way that meant she was not okay, but she was going to be, which was Jade's way. She said, "I'll talk to him." And she did. What followed between Jade and Sung-min was a conversation that lasted 4 hours in his Mapo apartment. The kind of conversation that either ends something or rebuilds it from the foundation. Sung Min told her everything, not a managed version, everything. Jade listened the way Nina listened, without interrupting, without performing her reaction, taking it in completely before she decided what she thought. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'm not going anywhere, but this has to change. You have to find a way out." She said it with the calm certainty of someone who had made the decision before she said it, and meant every word. Sung Min looked at her across his kitchen table and felt something happen in his chest that had no precedent in his adult life. He nodded. He said, "I'll find a way." She said, "I'll hold you to that." Meanwhile, the Choi network was moving. The rival faction, old money, old methods, deeply threatened by the systematic expansion of Hanul's legitimate holdings over the last 4 years, had been looking for leverage on Han Ji-hoon for longer than he knew. They were not the kind of organization that moved loudly. They moved the way water moved, finding pressure points, finding the places where stone was thin. They had known for some time that Ji-hoon had no obvious vulnerabilities, no vices, no debts, no weaknesses that could be located and pressed. Then someone found the mood board. It moved through their intelligence network with a quiet efficiency of information that knows it is valuable. The mood board, the pitch deck, the woman in the brand agency photograph standing at the Mapo photo walk, and beside her in the background, not posed, not aware of the camera, simply present, Han Ji-hoon, the most untouchable man in Seoul, photographed by accident by a woman who had been in the city for 6 months and who, according to everything that followed in the documentation, had become the first thing Han Ji-hoon had moved toward in 9 years that was not a strategic asset. The package arrived at Nina's apartment on a Tuesday. No sender name, beautifully compiled, the kind of dossier that takes time and resources and a very particular kind of intention. She stood in her hallway, holding it for a moment before she opened it, some animal instinct telling her that what was inside it was going to change the shape of things. And she was right. She read the whole thing at her kitchen table. Every front company, every documented connection, every name in the organizational structure, photographs, financial architecture, the full geography of what Han Ji-hoon was and had been and ran, laid out with the cold precision of people who wanted her to see it completely and feel it completely and do something with what she felt. She got to the end. She closed the folder. She sat very still. She cried once, not long, not dramatically, just one wave of it that moved through her and passed. Not from fear, not from surprise, because she had understood the shape of it for weeks, had known that the vague language of complicated edges was doing significant work. She cried from grief, the particular grief of loving something you wish were different, of holding something real that comes with a cost you didn't set and can't negotiate. She loved him. She had known it for a while and had been moving around the knowledge carefully, the way you move around something fragile. She loved him, and she was looking at a dossier that explained in comprehensive detail exactly what loving him meant, and she wished, for the space of one wave of feeling, that she didn't. Then the wave passed. She sat up straight. She thought. She picked up her phone and called him. "Come over," she said when he answered. "Don't send anyone. Come yourself." A pause. Different from the last time she'd said those words. This pause had more in it, a reading of her voice, a calibration of what was coming. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. She made tea while she waited. She didn't drink it. She stood at her kitchen window and looked at the city and organized everything she needed to say into the order she needed to say it. When he knocked, she let him in and walked back to the kitchen table and sat down. The dossier was on the table between them. He looked at it. His face went through something. Not shock, there was no shock in it, just the clear-eyed recognition of a man who understood immediately what he was looking at and who had sent it. He sat down across from her. "The Choi network," he said. I assumed. He nodded. She looked at him across the table. I need you to tell me one true thing. Not strategy. Not the version you've decided I can handle. One completely true thing about what you want. He was quiet. The kitchen was very still. Outside, Seoul moved on in the way it always did, indifferent and beautiful and enormous. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and had nothing performed in it. You are the first thing in 9 years that has felt like mine. Not something I built or bought or managed into place, just mine. Something I walked toward because I wanted to, not because I calculated the return. He held her gaze. I know I don't have the right to say that, given how we started. I know what I did with the contract. I'm saying it anyway, because you asked me for one true thing, and that is the truest one I have. Nina looked at him for a long time. You don't get to decide what I do with that, she said finally. She reached across the table and took his hand. He looked down at their joined hands with the expression of a man who had been given something he knew he didn't fully deserve, and was holding it with the care that knowledge required. She leaned forward and kissed him. Slow and deliberate, not urgent. The kind of kiss that is a decision. And when she pulled back, she kept her forehead against his and spoke quietly into the small space between them. I'm not running. I need you to know that. But everything from now on, every true thing, no more deciding what I can carry. Okay, he said. His jaw was tight. His eyes were full. Okay. She pulled him close, her arms around him, his face against her hair, and she felt it. The thing that happened when she held him. The way the tension left him in increments, like water finding its level, like a body remembering that it was allowed to rest. She held him, and he breathed, and outside, the rain had started again, quiet and consistent, and neither of them moved for a very long time. You already know this story is something special. Subscribe and leave a comment. Who are you crying for more right now? Jihoon or Nina? Tell us below. Jade missed their Saturday Mangwon market ritual for the first time since they'd started it. No text, no call, nothing. Just the particular silence of an absence that hadn't been announced, which was the loudest kind. Mina sat at their usual spot beside the fish cake stall for 20 minutes with her phone on the table watching it not light up, and then she called. Voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She sent a message that said simply, "Where are you? I'm at the market," and watched the 2 blue ticks not appear, which meant the message wasn't being read, which meant Jade wasn't looking at her phone, which Jade always was. She called Sungmin. He picked up on the first ring, which told her before he spoke that he already knew something was wrong and had been waiting for this call. Where is she? Mina said. A pause that lasted exactly long enough to confirm everything. We're handling it. Sungmin. Mina. Where is she? He told her enough. The Choi Network. A controlled disappearance. No violence. Clean. A message dressed up as a person not coming home. A message directed at him. Deliver intelligence on Hunnell's next strategic movement, or Jade didn't come home on her own. He had gone to Jihoon within the hour. Jihoon was already moving. Mina sat with this information for approximately 45 seconds. She did not panic. Panic was a luxury that didn't help Jade, and the only thing that mattered right now was Jade. She stood up from the market table, left her untouched coffee, and walked. She called Jihoon from the street. I know, he said when he picked up. Sungmin told me you called him. Mina, I need you to listen to me for 2 minutes, she said. Calm, precise, the voice she used in boardrooms when she needed people to stop talking and start hearing. I have something you don't have. Give me 2 minutes. A pause. Talk. My current client, the one I've been rebuilding brand identity for these past 3 months, is a subsidiary of Choi Holdings, their legitimate face. I have been inside their organizational structure professionally for 12 weeks. I know their communications director, their creative lead, and their external PR firm. She turned a corner, walking faster now. 2 weeks ago, their communications director complained to me over lunch about a logistics problem they were having with a property in Songdong-gu. She mentioned the address because she wanted my opinion on whether the location would affect brand perception. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Silence on his end. The particular quality of silence that meant he was thinking fast. "Send me the address," he said. "I'm already sending it." She thumbed through her notes app as she walked, found the address she had written down out of professional habit because she wrote everything down, and sent it. She heard him relay it immediately to someone in the room with him, his voice shifting into a register she hadn't heard before, clipped and certain, and completely without hesitation. The voice of a man who had been making high-stakes decisions for 9 years and had never once flinched at the weight of them. She arrived at his Yoido building 12 minutes later. His security team looked at her with the careful neutrality of people who had been told to expect her. She was taken up to a floor she'd never been to. Not the executive offices she'd seen once, something below that. Something with the quiet hum of a room where serious things were managed seriously. Ji-hoon was standing at a long table, covered in open laptops and printed maps, his jacket off, his sleeves rolled, his whole bearing transformed into something that made complete sense of everything she had ever felt was underneath the surface of him. Sung-min was beside him. 2 other men she didn't know stood at the edges of the room. Everyone was moving with a particular efficiency of people who did not have time to waste and knew it. He looked up when she walked in. Something crossed his face. Relief. And something more complicated than relief. The expression of a man who was glad she was there and worried about her being there in equal and simultaneous measure. She sat down across from him, opened her laptop. "Tell me what you need." "Nina, tell me what you need, Ji-hoon. This is Jade." He looked at her for 1 second. Just one. The full weight of it. Everything he felt about her in a single second of eye contact. And then he turned back to the map. "The property in Songdong-gu. We need to know which section of the building, which floor. If your contact mentioned anything about the interior layout..." "She mentioned the freight elevator was broken," Nina said immediately, already typing. "She said it was a problem for their logistics, which means they're not using the freight entrance, which means they're using the main entrance and they need the lobby clear." She looked up. "They're on an upper floor." The freight elevator being broken is an inconvenience if you're moving things. It's a problem if you're managing people. The room was silent for half a second. Sung-min looked at Ji-hoon. Ji-hoon looked at Nina. "You're terrifying," he said quietly, and it was the most loving thing she had ever heard said to anyone, in any room, in any language. She looked back at her laptop. "Go get her." Jade came home 2 hours later. Sung-min held her in the hallway of their Mapo apartment for a very long time, his arms around her completely, her face against his chest, neither of them speaking. Nina, standing in the living room, having arrived 20 minutes earlier to wait, looked at the ceiling and gave them the privacy of not being watched. When Jade finally came to find her, she looked tired and shaken in the way of someone who had been frightened and was now processing the relief of no longer being frightened, which had its own particular weight. Nina opened her arms, and Jade walked into them, and they stood like that in the middle of the living room for a while. "I'm okay," Jade said into her shoulder. "I know. I'm really okay." "I know that too." Jade pulled back. Her eyes were dry. She had clearly done her crying already, in private, which was also very Jade. She looked at Nina with a direct, clear-eyed gaze of someone who had spent 2 hours in a room alone, with nothing but her own thoughts, and had come out the other side, having made some decisions. "He's getting out," she said, not a question. "He told me," Nina said. "Good." Jade nodded once, firmly, with the certainty of someone who had made peace with a hard thing. Then we're okay. That night, Nina sat beside Ji-hoon on the floor of her Yeonam-dong apartment, her back against the couch, his head tilted back against the cushion, the lights low, and the city quiet outside. They had not talked much since he'd arrived. There was a specific exhaustion that followed a day like this one, a kind of wrung-out stillness that didn't need to be filled with words, and they had both, apparently, learned this about each other, without needing to negotiate it. His hand found hers in the quiet, held it. After a long time, she said, "Are you scared?" He was still for a moment. Of what specifically? Of what comes next? Of the exit? Of what you are without the organization underneath you? He thought about this with the genuine consideration of a man who did not give dishonest answers to honest questions anymore. Yes, he said. I built it at 23. I've been inside it for 9 years. I don't know what I look like outside of it. She shifted, turned toward him slightly, her shoulder against his, her head finding the angle of his jaw, fitting there the way things fit when they've been finding the same place long enough to know it. I do, she said quietly. He turned his head slightly, looking down at her. I've seen you outside of it, she continued, in a coffee shop in Ujiro, when every table was full and you gave me the seat across from yours. On a rooftop in Yeonam-dong, when you told me the truth even though you didn't have to. In my kitchen at midnight, standing at my stove in your dress shirt, making ramyeon that you'd never made before in your life. She paused. That man is not the organization. That man exists completely without it. I've been talking to him for months. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, Seoul moved in its vast and indifferent way. What if I'm not who I am without it? He said. The real fear. The one underneath the composure, underneath the 9 years, underneath everything he'd built to replace the thing his father's death had taken from him when he was 23, and there was power available, and no one else to hold it. She lifted her head, looked at him directly, the way she had looked at him across the photo walk promenade, without armor, without performance, with the plain and steady clarity of someone who had already made their decision and was not afraid of it. She took his face in both hands, her thumbs against his jaw. He looked back at her, and in his eyes, in the undefended dark of them, she could read everything, the fear and the exhaustion, and underneath both of those things, deep and certain as the city below them, the thing he felt when he looked at her, that had no name in his vocabulary, because he had never allowed himself a vocabulary for it. You have no idea who you are without it, she said softly. I think that's the whole point. I think you're terrified of finding out. And I think, she held his gaze, that the man I've been watching find out, slowly, for the last several months, is someone worth knowing, worth becoming. She kissed him, soft and slow, the way the best things are, unhurried, certain, with the particular tenderness of two people who have been through something together and come out the other side still choosing each other. He kissed her back with everything he had, which was considerable, and when they finally broke apart, he kept his hands in her hair and his forehead against hers and breathed. I don't know how I existed before you, he said. You weren't living in color yet, she said. He pulled back just far enough to look at her. His eyes were full, not spilling, just full, the way a room is full of light when every window is finally open. He kissed her again, briefly, and then again, not briefly, and she laughed softly against his mouth, and he smiled against hers. And they stayed like that, in the low light of the Yeonam-dong apartment, while the city held them, without knowing it. The call happened the next morning. He sat alone at her kitchen table before she woke up. The apartment was in its early morning state, warm and still, the light coming in at the low angle that belonged only to this hour, the sounds of the city beginning its day, drifting up from below. He had his phone in his hand. He had been sitting with it for 20 minutes. He thought about his father briefly, the man who had taught him that emotion was a weapon your enemies used against you,
who had died before Ji-hoon was old enough to ask him whether he had ever regretted that belief, who had left behind a power structure that needed filling, and a 23-year-old son who had filled it because there was no one else, and because he did not yet know what it would cost him. He thought about Nina, standing on a rooftop telling him she could see who he was without the empire, and that he was worth becoming. He made the call. The camera did not show what he said, only his face as he said it, calm and certain, and more open than it had ever been. The face of a man putting down something very heavy and feeling, beneath the ache of it, the specific relief of a body remembering what it is to stand without weight. He ended the call, set the phone on the table. He looked up. She was in the kitchen doorway in the early light, her hair loose, her feet bare, a cardigan pulled around her. She had been there long enough. She could see in his face what had happened, and what it had cost him, and what it meant. She crossed the kitchen quietly and sat beside him, not across from him, beside him, close, and took his hand without speaking. He looked at their joined hands, then at her face. "It's done," he said.
She squeezed his hand, leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then it begins," she said. 6 months later, on a Sunday morning in the Yeonnam-dong apartment, the city was doing what Seoul did in the early hours, breathing quietly, the light coming in warm and unhurried through the kitchen window. Nina was at the table with her laptop, feet tucked under her, completely in the center of herself, a half-finished coffee beside her, and a new project brief open on the screen. Ji-hoon brought her a fresh cup, made exactly as she took it, which she had never specified, which he had simply watched until he knew, and set it beside the cooling one without interrupting her. She looked up when he set it down. Something moved across her face, quiet and full. "What?" he said. "Nothing. Just—" She reached out and caught his hand before he could walk away, held it. "I'm glad you stayed." He looked down at her hand holding his, then at her face. This face he had been learning since a Saturday evening on the Ma-po promenade, when she'd been eating tteokbokki and looking at the river like it owed her an apology. And he had walked over before his mind could stop his feet. This face that had looked at him across every version of himself he'd shown her, the managed one and the honest one and the frightened one, and the one that was still figuring out who it was, and had not looked away from any of them. He brought her hand to his lips, slow and deliberate, his eyes on hers, kissed her knuckles one by one. She watched him do it like she was memorizing it, like she intended to keep it. He sat down across from her, picked up his coffee, returned to the comfortable quiet that had become, over 6 months, the texture of their life together, easy and unhurried, and full of the specific warmth of two people who had chosen each other past the point where choosing was convenient. She glanced up from her laptop, caught him watching her. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Staring at me like you still can't believe I exist." He picked up his coffee. "I can't," he said simply. She smiled, not looking up, just smiling, the private kind that belonged to no one else. He watched it happen on her face, with the expression of a man who has discovered, later than most, and at significant cost, that the world contains color, that it always did, that he simply needed someone to show him where to look. On the kitchen windowsill, in a small frame that had appeared there 3 months ago without announcement, the photograph sat in the morning light, grainy at the edges, golden at the center. A tall man in a dark suit, standing against the Han River at dusk, unaware he was being captured, his profile sharp and his posture immaculate, and his whole bearing carrying the absolute certainty of a man who believed he had never been caught off guard in his life. At the edge of the frame, barely visible, a hand, holding a disposable camera slightly wrong. The one photo she had taken all evening. The one thing she had found worth keeping. If this story moved you, wrecked you, or made you believe in love all over again, this comment section belongs to you. Tell us everything. And if you haven't liked and subscribed yet, do it now. Because if you love this, you have no idea what we're bringing you next.